So welcome, folks. Really pleased to have another episode of Insights with NetSupport. I'm Al Kingsley, and I'm really pleased today that I'm going to be chatting with Robert Martellacci. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
First question: did I pronounce that surname right? I have a habit of getting it wrong.
Pretty good job. You know, if you ever had a Martell cognac, it's Martellacci. So
you see, I got an rather than an R, so I apologize. So there you go.
No worries.
We're already talking about cognac, which means we're going to have a nice fine wines discussion, hopefully.
Awesome.
So, Robert, you're president of MindShare Learning Technologies and president and co-founder of C21 Canada. I was looking at your background and bio and thought, how do I summarize that? And I went for the easy option, which is I'm going to ask Robert to give us a bit of a background about yourself and your team, because you've got loads of experience in K through 12 and beyond.
You know, we're really passionate about making the connections between education and industry to help support student success and everything in between. You know, it's not my first rodeo. I'm on my third one, I guess. I started off as a university administrator, sport information director, played hockey, ice hockey. I know you have an ice hockey league in the UK that, you know, I could probably go try out because I still play 3 times a week.
I suspect it's not the same standard as your league somehow.
Well, you know, I might make the third line perhaps, but our former president of York University, the other York, Ian McDonald, who put me on his line when I was a youngster, just coming out of university, retired at 92. And so he inspired me to keep playing and the growth mindset. But I segued onto the business side of the university, and I connected with the chair of our board, was good buddies with one of the Dragon's Den stars, Kevin O'Leary, who's on Shark Tank in the US. He was our boss at the Learning Company. So the Learning Company was launching in Canada the software for education, CD-ROM, some floppy disks still existed at the time. And this was in the late 90s. So I was passionate about, you know, learning. And I saw, you know, we were just getting on the internet at the university. And I thought, this is really the future. You know, it's reminiscent of the impact ChatGPT is. It's going to impact people's pathways, right? I just presented at ERDI, Summer Institute in Washington last week about the future of AI in education. And it really, you know, challenges you as an entrepreneur in the education space to think about, you know, in future vision, you know, how can this be leveraged? So we talked about the trends and impact. And one of the things that, you know, I always like to end on a positive note is the career pathways, right? And, you know, we're here in the workspace. So fast forward to, you know, 20 years later, running my EdTech company after we were sold to Mattel, the learning company, and Kevin went off to do his you know, TV personality thing because he didn't really like the sales cycles in education being like this and not a hockey stick curve, as I like to call it. And you know, we had a mindset that we can make a real impact in, because there's so much fragmentation in the industry that we ended up, you know, becoming leaders. And here we are today, just, you know, with a co-working innovation center where we focus on the future of work and learning in a shopping mall. We have a kids robotics camp going on. These kids are like, you can hear them in the background. They were just wrapping up. They're 4 or 5 up to 7 years old, the early ones. So it's really a fascinating time to be part of this community.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that we may be separated by a very wide ocean, but there's so many common themes in the topics being talked about. For my sins, when I'm not wearing my CEO of an EdTech company hat, I'm chair of a multi-academy trust, a cluster of schools here in the UK.
Oh,
and
cool.
So much of our narrative within the education space and in our schools is about moving from that focus on content acquisition to skills. And of course, with the shift in AI and effective questioning and challenge and cognitive thinking, and there are so many elements that are much more about thinking about the future skills of the workplace and how that adapts and has been accelerated by the change in technology recently. And then recently I was across in the Middle East talking at a conference there where we were talking about the metaverse and about robotics and about STEM. And actually, all these things come back to a common theme in terms of skill set and broadening. So it's great to see that from the North American side, you're having and leading the conversations in a similar way.
Yeah, well, we definitely have opportunities to collaborate post interview. And, it is interesting. We just had one of the co-op teachers of one of our summer students here, and I took her on a tour, and we were talking about future skills and jobs of the future, and how it's no longer that you're going to do one career. You have to be agile. You have to have the critical skills. We have the 7 C's that we created through C21 Canada: critical thinking, computer skills, communication skills, and all those essential skills that we call them. They're not, I don't see them as soft skills. They're essential. I don't like the term soft skills. And really, following your passion is really super important to a point. Every year, the Maclean's magazine does a survey of university students. And one of the questions asked is, if you were to start your degree again, would you do the same one? Sadly, almost half say no. That's a critical error. I was able to pivot midway through, and I I found a passion for sport management, and it extended my term an extra year. But finding that passion and being practical. My I was at my sister and brother-in-law's last night, and my niece Maya said to her sister, "Ellie, if you want to be a makeup artist, just become a makeup artist." The aerospace engineer dad was right beside them, and what do you think he responded when he heard that? He lost his mind. I
Yeah,
said, "But maybe you could become a famous makeup artist, in the movies." He didn't like that concept, but
I think we're learning, and it's really interesting. I could talk on these subjects with you for ages, so we might get around to some pre-planned questions at some point. But I also think if you think about the C's that you referenced that you've been sharing as part of
yeah,
C21, they're all in effect tools that give you more opportunity to pivot and find that career pathway
right.
that works for you, rather than
Absolutely.
being too nuanced and specialized, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. The critical thinking piece is really important, right? It's really about problem solving. And, the students we have here from high school and university, they are, I could hire some of these kids out of high school that have the same skills university students might have 4 years ago. They,
Yeah.
they are armed and ready to go, but parents would not appreciate that. But the talent level gives me hope for the future.
Well, that's always good. We like the positives to focus on. So on a bigger positive,
Yeah,
before we started recording, and lovely to connect with you, I was sharing that our organisation has had a base in Markham in Ontario, not that far away from you,
yeah, I'd love to
uh,
visit and connect.
and we've been there since 1999. So we've been a
Wow,
while. But I'm more interested in discovering, both for the listeners on our show and actually on a personal level now, a bit more about MindShare Learning, because there seems
sure,
like there could be some really interesting resources that I could dip into.
absolutely. MindShare Learning began as a consulting firm that spun out of the learning company, where I launched the startup for Kevin O'Leary, now on Shark's Tank and Dragon's Den, and we became the largest global software company. And there was so much learning when you go through a dozen acquisitions in 18 months to become the largest, and then sold to Mattel, and it becomes a flop. Learning from failure is really valuable, and inspired me to launch Mindshare Learning, where we did strategy, and we started working with Research Machines. RM out of the UK was one of our key clients that we help enter into the North American education market. We worked with Macromedia that became Adobe. It was fascinating times early on. And then I augmented my skills doing my master's in EdTech at Pepperdine, teaching old dog new tricks. I went to Malibu, California, of all places. My wife thought I was going through a midlife crisis, but that inspired our conference, our Canadian EdTech Summit upon graduation, because we were challenged to change the world, and our Canadian EdTech report that was monthly. Now it's weekly, and we do a North America Can-Am report as well. So, we really focus on identifying who the key players are that could really make an impact on education and tech-infused pedagogy we talk about. And we have our podcast, the MindShare Report, MindShare TV podcast, which Al, I look forward to hosting you on my show. And we do that weekly. We embed it in our e-magazine. And we did some really innovative, cool stuff because that's what I experienced during my master's. When you're on the coast, when you're in the valley, when you're like in the game down there, it is, you're sometimes light years ahead, it feels. But, things caught up quickly during COVID. I mean, we were doing blended learning in 2006. And boy, did things accelerate post COVID, and where we're at today, the sky's the limit. And we're launching a course midsummer on EdTech as a career option. It's a micro credential. Because why? Because we saw a problem with the gap in skills of teachers and folks who want to go into EdTech but have no concept of what it is. And faculties of education have not addressed it. So we're more agile. And so we have a great micro credential with videos and interviews with legends. Kathy Hurley, 5-decade EdTech leader in the US, former Pearson senior vice president. And she's one of the podcast interviewees, along with others that are legends in the space that really will help accelerate the pathway and transition. Because I hear from a lot of EdTech executives that, we bring these teachers in and they don't understand and they don't do well and they don't last, the majority of them. So that's one of our innovations that we're just launching, along with the podcast series. We started MindShare TV during COVID. And my first podcast, interestingly enough, was Dr. Seymour Papert, from Professor Emeritus from MIT. So I've had the opportunity to interview Sir Ken Robinson before he passed. And, we just want to bring insight and expertise to the table to really connect the dots and narrow the gap to help all students thrive.
I love it. It's the same narrative that I see as I'm very lucky enough to travel around the world, that we've moved from the conversation of just EdTech to very much about evidence informed in different ways around effective use. And of course, pedagogy sits at the heart. But at the same time, there's also been a shift to recognize that we traditionally think of the word EdTech and we think the classroom. But actually, there's so many of our systems that we need to look at through a wider lens, because our schools operate in clusters, broader ecosystems, and data and accessibility and communication and staff workload all feed into that broader consideration. So are they all strands that you pick up and identify with your research?
Well, it's interesting. So coincidentally, the theme of our conference, our 14th Canadian EdTech Summit, is empowering innovative and sustainable learning environments for the future.
Perfect.
So we're treating it as an ecosystem. Our Schools of the Future Challenge became a student invention challenge. So we wanted to broaden the focus. And last year, the theme was around empowering innovation, evidence-based learning and resources. Where's the evidence? Driving innovation through evidence-based research was a theme last year. So we take a broader approach rather than narrow, because it's a system, and the system is complex, and we try to bring insight to every aspect of that system where technology is involved. Case in point, at the early Summer Institute, one of the companies is focused on safety and security. So every student has a lanyard with a QR code badge that when they board the bus, they tap, and the parents get a notification that they're on the bus. And when they get off the bus, they tap. Or when they go into the school, they tap. And we don't have that technology here in Canada. So that's one of the technologies that I'm I'm really high on, because safety and security, Maslow's hierarchy of values, never been
Absolutely.
more important today. I've heard parents say in the US, the most important thing for me is to have my kids go to school and come home safely. That's the most, sadly.
I'm nodding away, and those on the podcast version are going to be saying, "Well, I can't see you, Al," but I'm nodding because for those that know NetSupport, we do online safety monitoring software, and we do school-wide notification software, all built around those same broader concepts of
Right.
safety. What was interesting, and I think is a really important point about that, as you've referenced there, about looking slightly wider, is when we've looked at evidence of impact for many years, naturally, impact has been about have we shifted students' learning outcomes, their progress or attainment. But increasingly, probably largely focus of the pandemic, there's also a shift to social, emotional, mental health of children, their resilience, better communication with parents. And the biggest one, certainly in Europe, is how does the effective use of technology support staff retention as well as recruitment? How can we actually have a positive impact on workload and efficiency as well? So I wonder if those are the same themes that are resonating with your users and
Yeah,
listeners.
no, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned that in terms of teacher efficacy and the tools that they have available to them. It's very much a focus for us. At the end of the day, if a teacher doesn't have more time to work with, focus on their students and learning, versus dealing with more tools and more professional learning requirements, it's not going to make an impact. So we're very mindful of those challenges today. And, post COVID, the perception was EdTech failed. And what I argue is that EdTech helped sustain learning in a crisis. And while it wasn't elegant, it was sustained and enabled teachers to continue to teach, with their students.
Yeah.
It was basically teachers were building the plane as they were flying it. They were,
Yeah.
it was ugly at times, but
Yeah.
yeah,
It,
but
it, it was, but for the right reasons in many regards.
right,
I mean, I think we often say that the best way for catalyst for innovation is to take risks. And we were forced to take risks in March 2020 because we had to respond quickly on how to deliver that and continue that learning
right,
experience. And so it's natural that some things work and some things don't.
hundred
I'd
percent.
argue that more often than not, the failure wasn't the tech. It was the fact there wasn't opportunity for enough CPD to figure out how to use the tools effectively or which were the right tools to use.
Right. Well, here's an interesting stat. There's a not-for-profit group in Virginia who does research around evidence and impact in the use of EdTech. 85% they found of tech installs in education fail. I was shocked, and that was the inspiration for our theme last year around evidence-based research driving innovation. And we know some of the key factors: lack of PD, lack of proper installation, lack of regular meetings, communication between the vendor and the school district or school. There's a
Yeah.
lot of moving parts, so you can't just go do the sale and walk away. And I can tell you,
No.
there's some companies that are not going to exist after this coming year because of some of the shenanigans, we'll call it,
Yeah.
if I can use that term, that have happened in combination with ESSER funding post COVID. It's not good. It's,
No. Robert, you and I are on the same wavelength. I have many roles, and one in the UK is I'm chair of the British Education Suppliers Association, EdTech Group, representing British EdTech
Oh, how
vendors.
cool is that? We need to bring you over for a conference to Ottawa, Canada. That would be
I'd
wonderful to have you on a panel
love to
for
be
an
able to share
international
insights.
perspective.
But one of the
Yeah,
things that I think ties in with that is, the last thing you want is people selling the wrong products to the wrong people in a transaction and walking away. It does no benefit to the school and public money,
right,
doesn't benefit children, and it certainly doesn't benefit the ed tech sector and industry. So
right.
one of the things I think is really important is always getting that message across that I think in education, the transaction is never a price and goodbye. It's always should be the start of a relationship. That's how edtech products improve, is that co-production
Mhm.
element of working with schools and maintaining that relationship. Um, I could go on for ages. Oh, look, there's a little post there for your EdTech Summit there as
EdTech
well.
Alliance. That's our
Fantastic.
EdTech industry alliance we started.
Well, I
But
think one of the lovely things
yeah,
about these kind of conversations is you meet people because you want to gain their insights on one topic, but in doing so, you create lots of other avenues that we can
yeah.
continue and follow down, which I think would be really, really interesting.
I think I met some of your colleagues down at ISTE. I don't know if you
Yeah.
got to the ISTE conference.
hmm Yeah, we
Yeah,
do. It's each year. And BESA, British Education Suppliers, have a pavilion and representation for
right.
British companies. We do at most of the international events around the world, but
You
there's
you
really
know
close collaboration.
Yeah, you have me thinking whether we got the branding right in terms of the EdTech Alliance versus the Canadian Education Suppliers Alliance that make it broader.
Hmm? Maybe. I mean, I think one of the things after this podcast is we'll probably have to have a conversation and share some ideas about what the different sectors are doing. I'd love to
Yes.
understand that. What I do want to get from you today,
Yeah.
which is a tough one because I don't know whether you brought
Yeah.
a crystal ball with you to gaze into the future for me, but I'm interested in your perspective, particularly from the Canadian sector. What do you think is the number one opportunity you have right now for education in Canada? And I guess equally, what's the biggest challenge?
The number one opportunity we have in Canada in education is to accelerate change and transform the systems that are based on an uh, industrial model versus the environment we have created here in our workspace. That's agile. It has the right tools, the furniture, the mindsets of the growth mindset, and it's not linear, and the you know, and you have a combination of uh, grades. It's not one grade. It's collaboration, and it's unlike any environment you've been in that we have here because you have entrepreneurs, and then you have K-12 kids and post-secondary kids in the same space. So we have an opportunity to leverage the tools to really re-envision what school should be. In fact, in New Brunswick, one of the school districts wants to get away from the name of school, and they want to rename it something else. So I'm fascinated by where we're at in our history because this will be a defining moment. This period that we're in will be a pivotal moment where education will be very different, and those who choose not to adapt and re-envision will be left behind, particularly colleges and universities. When we have kids that come here on a weekend, I had no idea the event I was going to be hosting. It was called Innovire. This group, this not-for-profit Innovire, negotiated a deal with us for the event space. We have an interactive board out there with 32 kids came in, high school, some of the siblings. There was a student at the front teaching sustainable electricity who was in grade 10 from the local high school. And then they were building these windmills, solar windmills, doing coding amongst themselves. These were students, no adults. And then they brought in the keynotes, who is now going to keynote at my workspace because I met him through a great tech kid who found him on LinkedIn, the co-founder and CEO of the Canadian Space Mining Corporation. And then he proceeded to present. I can show you a quick image while we're talking. And I was just in awe that these kids, despite the system, are learning things that they would otherwise not learn because they are self-learning. Pretty remarkable.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not sure you showing me anything's going to work for the podcast, although I'm quite interested.
Oh
But
yeah, no, that's exactly.
but I mean, I love the fact that we're seeing around the world a move from, frankly, what is a century-old education system around those core skills that wherever you are in the world have almost replicated, to really looking now much more about a skill-based, free-form, an education system that provides different pathways for different learner potential and that encouragement of innovation. There are so many opportunities. Obviously, it all comes down to capacity and funding and time, but it's got to start somewhere, hasn't it, in terms of putting those ideas out there and giving them opportunity for young people to really shine.
It really does.
The term
Are you seeing the transformation happening?
A good example, I suppose, in pockets, I think is probably the fairest answer. One thing I was talking about actually on a discussion yesterday was when we think around the world and we look at high-performing school systems, we often get drawn to the OECD PISA rankings, which are those kind of league table snapshots of 15-year-olds' academic performance. And we see the same countries being top of the list. And one thing the OECD is doing is rather than moving away from those traditional core numeracy, literacy skills, is looking at what they refer to as a school system or education system that promotes human flourishing. And that breadth is now they're looking at ways to measure much more about those cognitive skills, critical thinking, digital skills, social emotional health, resilience, actually a love of learning. The measure of success shouldn't be a child at 18 saying, phew, I've got through the school system, never again. It's somebody who is sparked to want to be inquisitive and a lifelong learner. And I think that reflection now that actually there's more to measure than just attainment. There's other things. And that's very much led by the workplace. You know, the workplace is changing on where we put the weighting of those key skills we want in young people joining our workforces. Those C's you refer to, you know, those communication skills and those critical thinking skills, they're often the most important thing an employer talks about first, you know, and then we build on behind that. So I think that it is moving, but like everything, it takes time and it also takes, sadly, governments to sign up to it. And certainly what we see in Europe is most governments are committed to making changes where they can see the results within one electoral cycle. And in education, that's just too short. Someone's got to be bold enough to say, let's do this. And it might take 10 to 15 years to work its way through. But actually, this isn't about politics. This is about a paradigm shift in the way that we do education.
I agree. You know, we definitely are at a point where, you know, skills are taking, you know, center stage and looking at meeting the needs of the emerging worker, you know, in a global context, and you know, there's a sense of urgency, and you know, jobs of the future, right? You know, what are the jobs of the future? You know, the Canadian Space Mining Corporation. Here's an image of the gentleman that's going to be speaking. So Dan Sachs, you know, co-founded this Canadian Space Mining Corporation. So one of the challenges he was given by the Canadian Space Association was build an emergency hospital in a shipping container, and that's what they did. And one of my colleagues at ERDI, who was hosting the summit last week, her son is in aerospace and he wants to go into space mining. So she's like, put me in touch with that guy. You know, like I didn't know it was a thing. So, you know, EdTech wasn't a thing 25 years ago. right?
Absolutely.
When
The
we
world is
started in
changing.
EdTech,
Yeah.
right? I was in EdTech before it was EdTech, you know?
I never expected when we started this conversation, Robert, that we would end up talking about space mining. So we have definitely moved on. Nonetheless, I'm conscious of time on this episode. So one thing I did want to touch on was
Right.
you've already referenced it. Is tell me a bit more about EdTech Summit. You've
Yeah,
obviously
the
touched on the
EdTech,
topic, but
right. So the EdTech Summit is coming up fast. It's November 2nd and 3rd in Ottawa, Canada. We're partnered with, K to 20. I see it as a whole spectrum,
yep,
and faculties of education need to be more engaged. The Ottawa U has a brand new facility. We want to showcase learning environments of the future to paint a picture like we do here at our workspace. So we are partnered with the award-winning Ottawa Catholic School District that won our School District of the Year award last year. They're doing Dr. Michael Fullen's Deep Learning. So they're scaling beyond pockets of innovation. And I've used that tagline in the past, and I didn't want to use it again because I'm tired of talking about pockets of innovation. And Ottawa Catholic is walking the talk. And then we culminate our summit at Algonquin College that has a culinary program that is state of the art in a state of the art building. And again, we want to paint a picture of the future. The themes that are emerging around the summit, we're focused on diversity and inclusion. We're focused on designing schools of the future and what that looks like. We're focused on sustainability and what learning environments look like from a sustainability perspective, and well-being and inclusive environments, and safety and security. You can't ignore that from a cybersecurity and the future of learning in the context of AI as well. And so we're really hyper focused on future visioning, and everyone's going to walk away with their plan. So they're going to have a personal uh, plan of how they're going to tackle the challenges around designing innovative and sustainable learning environments for their respective organizations.
fantastic. At the end, I've got one more question for you. I will ask you
And they
just
get a micro credential for it as well.
well, the micro, that's all good. I mean, it's nice to get that. And I think it's really important that from the topics you're covering there, I've always maintained the more you incorporate technology to empower teaching and learning, you've got to be mindful of security and digital skills and digital citizenship. And it's about finding that equilibrium, isn't it? That you're looking at all facets.
Absolutely.
Which sounds exactly up your street. So before I share with our listeners where they can find out more about your good selves, the summit, and the broader platform with MindShare Learning, where they can certainly be, by the sounds of it, be keeping up to date with what's happening in Canada and beyond in the EdTech space. I always like to end up with one kind of key question, big thinking question.
Okay.
From your perspective, what do you think is exemplary about the Canadian education system? Is there something that you look at and think, you know what, we do that well, we do it right, we're proud of that?
We treat teachers with great respect, and they are well paid. And as a result of that, we have tremendous equity across the country, despite the fact that we're three territories and 10 provinces. Teachers are held in high regard, and we are a safe country, and education is considered a keystone of the country, and innovation is in our DNA, and so we take great pride in our high performing schools around the country. We rank continually top 5 in PISA OECD rankings, but we can't rest on our laurels, and that's the danger. There was a stat out today in one of the papers about people feeling like over 80% feel that they don't have the digital skills for the future to help them. And AI presents huge challenges about in that people could be left behind if they're not immersed in it.
It's funny, we've spent so much the last few years trying to build and make sure that we've got digital equity. We have to be mindful that sometimes as new technology accelerates quickly, that technology you hope will build equity can actually extend the divide, certainly in the short term, when you have that skills and confidence around it. I mean, it's lovely to hear you talking about both remuneration but respect for the teaching profession. Sadly, in many countries, that isn't something. And as such, that retention part, we're losing amazing people simply because they don't feel valued or they're not given the opportunities to progress. And it's very sad. So good on Canada for that one.
Yeah.
Big thumbs up.
And on that note, when I was speaking at our Can-Am event, we hosted our 26th Can-Am networking event at ISTE, celebrating excellence in innovation and education. And one of the things they talked about was the future is really about, AI for sure, but HI as well. And that's human intelligence. It's about people. And we can't lose that.
And it's such a lovely way to wrap things up, because there's been so much fear how AI will replace people. But in education, the thing we always take away, it's about that person at front of class and the rest of the class. It's the human interaction, it's the nurture, it's the encouragement, the empathy.
Yeah.
Those are the human skills that we need to enhance and evolve to work alongside technology, not to replace. And long may that continue. Robert, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. For those listening, could you share a couple of addresses, web addresses, where people can get in touch with you?
So for sure, if they want to follow us on Twitter, we're at MindShare Learn, and www.mindsharelearning.com is where they can learn more about us. You can subscribe to our free EdTech report, and also learn more about our summit happening November 2nd to 3rd in Ottawa, Canada, which is a great place to be in November, nation's capital.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for listening in today, folks.
Pleasure. Grateful for your time today. Thank you, Al.